Okay, so let us begin. My name is Yoon-Il. I will be the moderator for this session. So I think I want to dive into the discussion later on after the presentation as well. So we're here physically, but please, I'd like to remind everyone that we're spiritually in Jeju because we're going to talk about Jeju. When we use Google Map, you can see the satellite point of view of where you are. Right? Just picture yourself spiritually going to Woljeongri of Jeju. The satellite image shows that your location is going to Jeju right now, okay? So with Miss Park Sehyun here, I came from Jeju. Jeju Island is actually listed 3 times by UNESCO. And its most important value was created in 2007 when it was listed as the World Heritage Site. And when listing a place as the World Heritage Site, it's very important to see what kind of intrinsic values the place has. And Jeju was listed because of its lava caves. And Yongcheon Cave was critical in making this happen. That cave is located in Woljeongri. So basically, after the designation that Woljeongri Village has become a World Heritage Site village, let's think of the female divers in Woljeongri. They not only gather the sea creatures, they also do a lot of work in fields. So what would this have meant for these female divers? The designation as the World Heritage Site. 2/3 became preservation spaces, and 1/3 became 1/3 of the fields became protected land. And then around that area, the sewage plant became constructed, and a lot of wastewater started to be processed. The recent issue has been the conflict of the village and the administration regarding the expansion of the sewage plant. With more tourists coming into Jeju Island, because the sea became polluted, the more wastewater was created. So a lot of villagers didn't want the expansion of the sewage plant, and a lot of them have resentment over the issue. We will hear from Ms. Moon-hee regarding this topic, and there's a lot of talking points regarding this, and we're going to have to talk about it within 1 hour. We can do that because we have a great speaker here with us, great panelists as well. So let me introduce them for you. We have the activist that researches, Ms. Moon-hee, and on my left, I have the researcher that is an activist. We have from SNU, Ms. Han Kyung-hee. So yes, let's get into the presentation straight away. As introduced. So I want to start off from where the last presenter ended. Being an activist means seeing over and over again that something is not yours. So I live in the southernmost area of Jeju Island. My name is Moon-hee. On the very bottom of the first screen, you can see that I have identified myself with many titles. It's the first time that I've done this, actually. You can see a lot of titles there. I think the most important title, though, there is the beautiful red line, and that is the group that activists created for Jeju Island. It's a discussion group that we created. to talk about what is the basis of this destructive development. And the rest is regarding the uh, development of different areas. And the reason why I have such titles is because Jeju Island is facing a lot of thoughtless development, and I wanted to really stress this. And I feel like I have a lot of things to go over from the very first slide. So on the very first slide, you see something called temak that's important for female divers to hold on to out in the open sea when they dive to gather food. And this tewak is something that people use in coastal areas. But you see in the picture that it is on cement, so just land. And then on top of that, we see some wildflowers placed by female divers. So why is this temak, which should be out in the open sea, on ground? I think that's the message that I want to give all of you. So as a commoner, I want to talk about women in history and colonialism in this context. Okay, so this is some background in detail. And what's most important here is why the sewage plant was constructed in the first place in this village. There's no rational reason for it, actually, environmentally. It's just because there's not much population there, and so less people who resist against it. But when we look at it geologically, that facility shouldn't have been constructed there in the first place. But the start of thoughtless development comes from just starting a plan out of nowhere so basically making a mark on white paper. And I divided the slides into 3 pages. As the female divers resisted against this development, in they asked for solidarity in a village that was 67 kilometers away, which is very far. So it wasn't even a nearby village. And in the beginning, everybody resisted, but because the village head and the village association is a very patriarchal system, the affairs of the administration came first. I don't want to say that that is something that is wrong, but I do want to say that we need to throw the question of which is the best method to approach this. So these female divers on their own decided to struggle against the construction of the plant, and that's where my passion came from. I never thought that I would be able to see such movement in my lifetime. The movement of women, especially, against a higher power. But the reality is quite dire, actually. All in all, they weren't able to overcome the patriarchal power. And so basically, under the name of Village Future Development, the administration came to an agreement to make this project work. The secondary citizens, female divers, weren't considered at all in this process, and the same went for citizens. What's important is that the citizens don't have ways to access democracy actually in this village. Geologically, this plant shouldn't be here. This is the rationale that the residents wanted to propose. That's why the villagers found a lot of important problems regarding the World Heritage Site, the Yongcheon Cave. Okay, so these were the things that we discovered from this protest. When you look at the names there, you can see it talks about the ocean as the forefront of climate disasters and the sense of community, so community against disasters. These are all words spoken by the female divers. So the Eastern sewage plant started operations in 2007 and started with processing 6,000 tons. But then in 2014, it was expanded once, actually. And just 3 years after, it was expanded again. And in that process, that's when the female divers resisted. So why did this become a problem? When we look at the legalities, we can see a lot of documents here found. Actually, to expand the facility, it should have been reapplied for the expansion, but the site wasn't listed or applied with Yongcheon Cave. And that is because in 2007, when the Yongcheon Cave was listed as the World Heritage Site, about 600 meters underwater of the cave wasn't investigated. And the Cultural Foundation just overlooked this. Why is this? It's because the nearby areas of the cave were designated as a place where construction activity, all forms of construction activity, is banned. So in the picture on the bottom, you see that a hole has been dug on the road. Why is that? Because when there's rainfall, there's no streams nearby, so there's nowhere for that water to go to. What kind of a place is this? If you dig a hole on the ground, rainwater just seeps through it. So I said that this village was located on the northern eastern side of the island. And you can see that nearby this area, there's no streams, basically. You can see the map with streams on the screen. And Jeju Island has been created with a series of volcanic eruptions, right? And Jeju Island doesn't have one single form of rock that consists the place. So in the northeastern part of Jeju, all the way up to the boundaries against Seogwipo, there's no streams, which is a hazard for floods and disasters. So this was something that we discovered. And the rainwater actually seeped into places like Sungor or Tamalas. So when we went to Woljeongri, we saw that just holes appeared in fields. And rocks with no grass on top of it would often just become sinkholes. So you can't really cultivate the land there because it's prone to a lot of sinkholes. So you see the picture on the left, you see some red lines, and this is a picture taken in Hawaii. That's what Sungor is. In Yongcheon Cave, it's a World Heritage Site. When we look at the map of the world, Yongcheon Cave, you don't see the very underground areas of it because the last 600 meters, like I've mentioned, haven't been investigated. And the thing is, as a mistake, the World Natural Heritage headquarters in Korea showed us the map of this place. So let me just skip over this a lot because 10 minutes have already passed. And some other problems that we have discovered. What about the public power? So the conflict has been posed as a conflict against citizens and the construction company. And a lawsuit had been filed against the citizens by the construction company. And with this, a lot of the residents banded again with one another. And this is the words that we found on at the place of action. Climate disasters, the ocean. Right now, the ocean is more like the endpoint of disasters and the rubbish bin for people. Female divers said that they are basically a community with disasters right now. They are the endpoint of disasters. And also, there's a lot of things I want to talk about. So let me just be speedy in my presentation. So this is regarding the community against disasters. What kind of a role did this community play? It's actually a very patriarchal community. And there's the development committee. They are in that village, which plans the development in that area. When the female divers said that they would protest, this development committee actually hindered the movement of the female divers. They cut the electricity. And the residents, when they heard about this, the villagers, they came together with the female divers. So the lunch boxes here you see is what the villagers brought every day for the female divers. And you see the villagers with the female divers all banding together and acting together, sleeping together, having meetings, and more people coming together after the word sped. And these female divers often got, people told these female divers that they were acting like a NIMBY. But these female divers said that we're just defending our right. And we, as the villagers, know the most about this area. So these female divers said that we should overcome this concept, the stigmatization that people have about NIMBY, because we know most about the place that we live in. So the system of sacrifice is a term that was often mentioned. And in this system, the logic is that everything happens by passing down all of the bad concepts and culture. Female divers are quite old and they had to resist against authority. In Jeju, what do you think the perception of female divers is? On the bottom, you see the commemoration of the Jeju female divers' resistance against Japanese occupation, but you see that a lot of meaning behind the commemoration has been gone. And all of the ritual was Confucian style, and all of the chief officiant to the presenters, all the commentators were male in that commemoration. And here you see the tourists on the cruise going to Jeju Island, and you see the female divers dressed in their attire during cold winter. And then on the left, you see these divers in cold weather protesting. And 3 kilometers away from this protesting site, the 2023 Romantic Divers event was being held. It's very paradoxic. So with female divers, we talked about colony. IPCC said that the root cause of climate crisis is actually colony. So this is the song of the Jeju female divers. When we look at other songs of fighters, we see wordings about opening a new world, basically songs of male having a very, very great passion and defeating the enemy. But these women are singing about different things. They're saying that they're the pitiful sea women of Jeju. After they come home from work, they have to take care of their babies. And that's not enough. Sometimes they have to go to another country to work and their husbands are having an affair, so I can't even stay in the house. I have to go outside. That's basically the reality of these Jeju female divers. They're basically secondary citizens. that are being taken advantage of. So they're being colonized basically. So please play the video. So this was the very first assembly that we had. The oldest female diver there is singing. And she sung the entire song. And we cried listening to her because we really knew where her heart came from. Okay, let's cut it short there. Right, so these are all of the wordings of the female divers. And they said that we are the ocean. Sometimes we classify ourselves as different beings from the ocean, the same as we do with animals and people and women and men. But there's inequality in their relationship, and from there stems colonization. Female divers repeatedly talk about this, but in reality, a lot of them have uh, lawsuits filed against them. The same goes for me, and a lot of these female divers have been fined a great deal. So these are the questions. Yeah, I was very happy writing down these questions actually. So I'll be the one that asks questions. So panelists, please feel free to answer these questions for me. You see a lot of questions here on the screen. I think the first one is the most important question. So when we say commons logic, have women been overlooked when we talk about commons? And also, do we have our perspective regarding gender equality and commons? And the actors of violence, if they are the people that are most close to me, like my father or my husband, how are we going to talk about this? And given our current circumstances, how should we engage with activists recognized as the final colonies in the landscape of contention and the disaster-centric communities that they establish? And I also have one more question I want to shed light on. As we go to commons, what is the colony that we have internally? Okay, so this is actually a 1 hour presentation, so it was very difficult for me to shorten this. And this is the first time that that I've kept the time. But I think all of you there will realize that this truly is a story that you can't hear without tears.
Yeah, so I would like to make some additional comments. So back in 1978, during the Chan administration, so they had a demonstration, and also they took to the street to go against the government's decision to set up this facility, which processes feces and urine. But then the facility was installed later on, but then the commitment of the government was made verbally. So, which is why they choose not to abide by their commitment, the verbal commitment. So in 2017, they decide to add the second facility on top of the existing facility. The expansion was made. And because of that, the community got together to come up with a sort of the emergency committee to go against this idea. But it was dismantled in January this year. So all these female divers, they are sort of isolated in their own community. Let's hear from Ms. Huang. Yeah, so I have been quite surprised because of all the questions you listed. So I've never been to Woljeongri, to be honest with you, and the presenter told me again and again about the situation and the case, and it really indeed is heartbreaking. But I wasn't sure whether I would be able to, offer interesting thoughts on this discussion. So I have researched on the concept of commons, but within that frame, how can I respond to those questions? So when we talk about women, so what I came up with based upon my study was that, I mean, I studied about this case in Japan. It was about, workers, blue collar workers in Japan. And as you know, Japan is one of the, advanced nations up until 1980s. So a lot of blue collar workers in Japan, they were bachelors. They didn't have family members. And these day workers, daily employees, they thought they were sort of like used for one-time purposes and then discarded right after. So when we talk about agency, we don't use the term male. I thought it was interesting. So when we talk about, climate change and people who are homeless, they are sort of on the front line of this, climate change and climate crisis, but we don't use the term male or men when we talk about these people who are vulnerable. So within this patriarchal system, how do we perceive men and women? So I think that is reflected in the language we utilize. So although you are so persecuted in our society, you're once again sort of persecuted again because of your gender, your maleness, femaleness. So when a community fights against this persecution, you come up with an idea, an identity, right? So when we talk about commons, we have to perceive identity from a broader scope, a broader perspective. We should not sort of, pigeonhole everybody based upon their gender. In our battle, I suppose, especially in the field, this is a really difficult topic, really difficult sort of initiative. And also in case of Woljeongri, female divers. So I suppose that the way they secure security is quite different than how the nation state does. So I suppose this is the answer to the first question. The answer to the question, which was in time of disaster, what proactive measures exist to safeguard the well-being of refugees? So Woljeongri female divers, if you think about them, they are still sort of hanging on to this battle that everybody has given up on already. So they perceive themselves as part of the ocean. It's not about, them versus the ocean or ocean versus them. They are part of the ocean and the ecosystem. If you think about the modern day, modern world, we divide ourselves, we sort of isolate ourselves from the nature. The humankind is detached from the nature. So the way they perceive themselves is quite interesting, isn't it? So this indeed is a sort of really important segment when it comes to commons. Us perceiving ourselves as part of the world and part of the community. So if the safety, if you think about safety, the patriarchal idea is that someone protects someone and someone is being protected by someone else. So there is the party that offers that type of safeguard, safety net. There is also the other party that is the recipient of that type of care and protection. But the fundamental notion itself is very sort of violent. So we have to think about the danger everybody's in and how we could sort of pursue safety by working together. So that's the thing that I was sort of I try to grapple with. Yeah, so this was the scene of battle, which made me think about all of these things. In addition, there's also, I think it's a third question or fourth question about the transition, right? I suppose, the disaster has become part of our lives. So the state, the corporations, they are incapable and they are irresponsible. They have absolutely no accountability. And there are many, incidents and accidents happening here and there, just like Itaewon tragedy. They just do not make any sense whatsoever. So you go to workplace one day and you get killed for whatever reason, and that's senseless, but it happens. But those senseless accidents and incidents are accepted in a way by our society. So it all comes down to individuals to make conscious decisions to, secure safety. So you accumulate wealth, so you protect yourselves or protect your loved ones based upon that capital that you have accumulated. So this author, Rebecca Slitt, talked about disasters. At moments of disaster, what do people do? People help others, and it is very natural. So it's very efficient how people move and very natural how people help others. That is not something that can be offered by the nation state. So this indeed is the sort of the way of commons. So that type of support system exists. So we have to think about how we organize our lives and how we care about others. We are too heavily relying upon the nation state. But when it comes to disasters, at the moments of disasters, we help each other out. Ironically, though, I suppose disasters will continue to happen. When we are confronted with those situations, I suppose we will witness the advancement of technologies. So researchers and activists will have to think about how we can all connect the dots and make sense off of it. So with that, I now conclude my comment. Thank you.
Okay, so the presenter has 7 questions for us on the screen, and the panelists are here giving their answers. It's like Russian roulette, basically. So we have people here from the floor who we want to really hear from. So after we have this discussion, we will pass the mic to the floor, and then we will hear, last but not least, from Ammunhi. So yes, the next panelist, please. Hello, I am from the Research Center on the Commons and Sustainable Society. I am Park So-hyun of Jeju University. So there's a lot of questions that we can see there on the screen, and the person said that people only pose questions that can be solved. So I think these things that are things that we can all solve and think about together. So I would like to use my time by sharing some questions that I have. So 월정리, the sewage treatment plant, regarding this happening, I have questions of my own. This village in Jeju and the democracy of this village is, I think, what we should focus on. I think there's a need to look at democracy from a different light here. I think when we say self-autonomy and our right to make decisions, this Jeju Island problem poses a lot of problems regarding who are the owners of the village, the villagers or the people in power. So first we have to look at the structure of the village. The villagers banded together through the village assembly. But other than this village assembly, there's other groups, autonomous groups within the village. There could be the female divers and other farm owners that have their own interest groups. And the problem with village development is crucial in talking about the sewage treatment plant and compensation, and whether we can divide growth from development. As has been said in the presentation, development is something that the nation or the local government starts. But I think we should think deeper. I think that a top-down development should no longer be applied. We can also think about village development that is the opposite of top-down. And I think in development, we need passion. So through passion, we need the voices and the passion of villagers who really have the will to develop the region and the village. From this, we can achieve economic growth and sustainable development, healthy social sustainability. And with this, we will be able to see a conflict between people that want a better life and people who want just development. So like the development committee that was mentioned in the presentation, there could be a conflict between that committee and the villagers. And a problem of hierarchy. Such conflict and hierarchy leads to another question of whether the economic growth of a village that comes from the sewage treatment plant per se really reflects the passion of the villagers. So the development of an interest group and the passion of the entire village is dislocated. I think that this shows the problem of democracy within the village. And this democracy, is it democracy that we can see from the outside, demonstrated by votes and a voting system? Or is it democracy where people can discuss various opinions on how to better the village? And I think we can go back to the really foundation of democracy here. I think that the problem of democracy can be seen in the protest of female divers in Woljeongri, and it's a very difficult problem that we should think about. What is the true democracy in a village? I think the problem of democracy comes from not only the passion for economic development, but for better lives, sustainability, circular economy, passion for a different life. And also, do we have communication or education for that passion to rise? And in that process of communication and dialogue, can villagers change? The question of who does the village belong to? To reiterate, to who does this village belong to? I want to stress that, of course, the male figures aren't the ones that own the village. I think the villagers that change, the villagers that have the passion for change in the future, are the owners of the villages, the true owner of the village. So in this Woljeongri female diver protest, I think we need to think about finding the passion for the democracy in the village and how we could bring about this different sense of passion.
Yes. So I'm looking at you, all of you. So they have sort of provided you with their feedback. So I suppose because of the time limitation, you didn't have enough time to share all of your points. So thank you so much for your feedback and comment. So Ms. Han talked about the situation of disasters, right? So what type of sort of possibilities that disasters bring out? And I have experienced these disasters personally. So I suppose in the memory of the past disaster, we are sort of transitioning into the next disaster. So this is in a way for us to find out that there is a very small chance of improving things. So as Sohyun Park mentioned, that honestly, democracy, I suppose the term itself, the term democracy is too conceptual, too unrealistic. It's just too far away from uh, where we are at the moment because the violence itself is too direct, it's too close, it's too real. So the two of you, I suppose, talked about many different things, but I want to respond to your feedback and comments with the description of the female divers in Jeju. So what is the sense that we lost? And what type of agency do these female divers have? So these female divers, so I suppose that they are the actual direct victims of climate disasters. They feel the impact that the climate disaster has on the ocean. And if you think about in our world where the capitalism is within the capitalistic framework, it is difficult to sort of, physically get the assets. So if you think about how they work and collect the seafood, it is very physical. And I mean, if you think about human beings, we are really vulnerable. We don't have the proper protection that the innate protection that we have we are born with. So to get the abalone, they go down to the ocean and get one or two pieces of abalone, and they go back and forth to the land and go back to the ocean. Then after, working for a few hours, they eat up really high calorie biscuits. because they're so exhausted and hungry and they burn so many calories in doing so. And people who are in their 70s and 80s, they are sort of like grannies. So they don't go down to the deep ocean, rather they work in the sort of shallow oceans. So, younger female divers, they go deep into the ocean. In the meritocracy world, this doesn't really make sense. But what they do is, these granny divers, they, sort of uh, take charge of the light load work, and the younger divers, they sort of become in charge of the heavier burden. As they put together what they have collected and divide the wealth together. So they are working for the common good of all of the members and individuals. And also, what touched me the most was the scene that I witnessed when one of the female divers retired. So, so they have this ritual for sea gods, and they have this shaman, the ocean shaman, and they take a look at the list of female divers. And there are some divers who are in their 70s and 80s. So the shaman just tells them, you know what, if you keep on working, you're going to die. So based upon, that comment made by the shaman, that female diver said, you know what, I was going to give up on it anywho. Then people go quiet. And that's the end of it. That's the end of the career for that particular female diver. And it was really emotional. There was something emotional about the whole scene. And although we're living in a modern world, so when in the past, though, if you think about it, in the ancient times, we were so close to the nature, we are so close to other animal species, and within that sort of circle of life, it just taught me that we are still part of it. And the messages that female divers utilize when they have a press conference was that we are the ocean. It is a message that is so close to their heart. And I think it goes beyond the individual connection to the ocean. Rather, it is about the common good of the community. So that's how I would like to answer your questions. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm the moderator, but I also want to be participating in the discussion. So I think the important word in 월정리 is transfer. And the fight of 월정리 is the fight and the resistance of the women of the village to not get the burdens. And I think when we say transfer of burdens, we can think about exploitation and where things are consumed and wasted and what kind of impact it has is a very difficult problem in the political world. The expansion of the 월정리 is because they wanted to get the wastewater from the city areas. Basically, it means that there was a transfer of burden from city to countryside and from the urban residents to the female divers. And I think that we can talk about the commons of the genders. The head of the village is male, and the village's female divers are very persistent on protecting their villages because they do a lot of work in the field. Usually that land belongs to their husband. So the husband becomes the so-called business manager, and then the woman, the wife, become the workers of that field. But then when they become the female divers, they work on equal ground with everybody else. So this sense of identity, this autonomous sense of identity is very important for these female divers. it's directly related to how they live as females and women in the village. And third, I think that there is a conflict with the commons. So the Yongchang Cave is designated as the World Natural Heritage Site, right? This is in conflict with the Woljeongri's fishermen, and we see a conflict between the sewage treatment plant and the cave and the sea, where the female divers come into play here is very important. And I think these female divers are like prophets. Basically, with their senses, they can feel like something has gone wrong. They know in advance about the calamities that are dooming upon people in the village. And last but not least, I want to talk about the community of disasters. Right now, Woljeongri is facing severe side effect after the protest of the female divers. It might have been very beautiful before, but right now these female divers are very isolated and there's a lot of conflict or tension between the female divers as well. So what kind of sense of problem can we have? When we say the community of disaster, we need to look at the interactions between people before that disaster. We're always going to be faced with disasters, and right now we're living post-disaster, right? Then what can we learn from previous disasters to prepare for the next disaster as a community? I think that's one lesson that we can get from the Woljeongri case. Okay, Miss Han, could you go next?
Yes. So based upon Miss Ahm's comment, so as female divers get older, it gets tougher for them to work, and they all acknowledge this. So they are fully aware of sort of the limited time that's given to them to make a living, and also what type of sort of dependency, the mutual dependency they have on the nature. So I suppose Miss was touched by all this trajectory of them sort of creating these uh, track records, so to speak, of utilizing the commons. And I talked about the case of Japan. And Japan went through the Edo era, and in the past, there was a class of daily workers. And even back then, they didn't have family members, they were nomads. So as you know, whenever they went to, let's say, a construction site, even though there was no job available for them, they were given a free meal. So there was, I mean, if you think about them, they don't have a close uh, relationships with one another amongst the community. But still, they sort of helped out one another. And the same logic or same rationale is applied to those female divers, the granny divers. And also, Mr. Yun talked about this. Something is being dismantled. And as communities go through difficult experiences, when they're confronted with difficult problems, the sense of commons is brought back to life. So we work together and we create relationships based upon that. And I suppose this is a fundamentally difficult issue. So Wanja talked about worldview earlier today. So we don't create worldview overnight. So this is unless we restore this worldview, which tells us that we are connected with one another, so there are many things that are sort of stopping us from creating this close bond. And there is existential power. And against this backdrop, we are vulnerable beings.
Okay, so I feel like when we look at it from the logic of traditional politics, it could be understood as NIMBY, but we shouldn't stop there. So I think we need to look at the context behind the context. That's key. And I think we need to think about different people. By thinking about different people, I don't mean something big. It's something that these female divers have been doing, sharing with one another within their own tradition and culture. And I think this shows that the idea of just fending for oneself, working in silos, and privatization, which are very important in modern people's lives, shows that we have something to learn from this fight of the female divers. So, what has existed is the consideration for other people's lives, and that's something that we need to think of. I think that this is quite different from just winning. And I think we need to consider this perspective. Okay, I think this discussion has snowballed. So, Miss Amuni, could you wrap it up? Yeah, I was very happy in posing these questions for all of you, but I have to wrap up. Okay. So, as Mr. Puck said, who does the village belong to? I think that question should be asked for all of us. And when we have discussions in Jeju, that's the very first question that we post as well, because we see a lot of hurdles on site, and that actually didn't have a lot to do with public power. That's actually something that we can deal with through legislative measures. We can fight against them legislatively. Of course, we're losing in that sense as well, but the hurdles that we experience are oftentimes regarding the community of villages. So, who are the stakeholders? A lot of times, the stakeholders are those that have public power, so the governmental authorities. And for these females to really engage in this fight, there's a couple more hurdles. These female divers have very lead very difficult lives in their household. We're talking about colonialism, and we need to think about what we should have as a concern regarding colonialism. When we say ocean, we can say that all beings within the ocean are equal and together have a collective value. I think being able to coexist and playing one's role well is important in the context of disaster and villages. I think we should now intuitively know what we should do, and that's the characteristic of the a community for disasters. The mic isn't on. Okay, so when we say 월정리, we usually think of the area of disaster, site of disaster. It's quite far from where we are right now, but it's adjacent to our concerns. So I think we can find, so we've talked about an hour about 월정리 and the concerns on 월정리. So please, a round of applause, please. Thank you very much. And this wraps up the session. Okay, so whether it's being streamed online or not, I really wanted to add this last word. The 월정리 protest is a very important matter in terms of decolonization and colonization. But even in our society, because of our own desires and greed, it's not being talked about enough, regardless of the public authority. So basically, this big problem in Korea wasn't discussed in Korea. So we felt like it would be a good idea to discuss this Korean issue in this international symposium. So if other participants from overseas have listened to this case, I hope that we can stand in solidarity going forward. Thank you very much for listening to the last session, staying with us until the very end. This was a very fruitful session. So this wraps up the heated discussions that we've had for the last 3 days. UNESCO-DCMÉT Symposium. Thank you very much.